Hey, Professor K here, and I'm so excited today because we're going to be learning JavaScript. So JavaScript is tons of fun because, as you know from our previous classes, JavaScript is what allows you to build functionality, to change things in your index.html, to add new styles, to really modify and change things in a way that you can't do with just HTML and CSS alone. The other great thing that JavaScript allows you to do is to access data and APIs. So you can work with other services to bring in new functionality to your website. For example, things like Google Maps or pulling data from Spotify. There's so many cool things you can do with JavaScript. But before we run, we got to learn how to walk, right? Just like we did with HTML. So today I'm going to take you through just some real basics of JavaScript. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're learning in this class, where you're going to find your files in your boilerplate, and then just real simple how to declare a variable and how to log it out to the console. So with that, let's get started. All right, so here I just want to show you the student site boilerplate. This is the same template that we're going to be using for your final project. And one of the things that you're going to notice is inside of source, you have a JS file and then scripts.js. This is where you're going to be writing all of your JavaScript. So when you go to write JavaScript for a real project or for an assignment in this class, this is where you're going to go ahead and edit that. The reason why, and you might see some other interesting files in here, like this eslint rc.js. This is actually a settings file that helps us lint our JS and make sure it's up to coding standards. So here we're going to follow the Airbnb coding standards, make sure everything looks really great, and there's just a couple other settings in there. For this class, you never have to change this file. The only file you're ever going to work with is scripts.js. So one thing to know about JS in this class is that we're kind of in a period of transition with JavaScript. Just like CSS, the web is always changing and JavaScript is always changing. So you're going to see two types of JavaScript out there. One is called ES5, ECMAScript 5, and that's just really a name for kind of what the syntax of JavaScript was at a certain point in time a little while ago. All browsers support that, all modern browsers, so you never have to worry about using that syntax. The more modern syntax, and what we're going to be learning in this class, is called ES6. Now, why are we learning the more modern syntax? Because in a couple of years, I don't want your knowledge to be kind of back in the wind. So we're going to learn ES6. I'm going to tell you some ES5 fallbacks as we go through. This is really most important with things like variables. So we're going to cover a lot of that in this week's set of videos. But just know that it's just two different types of syntax. We're just using the newer, more modern syntax. And the reason why we can do that in this class is because in this boilerplate, we've set up what's called a compiler. So the one that most people use today is called Babel. And all it does is it says, oh, you're using ES6 syntax. I'm going to translate it back to ES5. That's where the name kind of comes from, right? Like a Babelfish. If you've ever heard of that, if you're a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan, that's kind of like the idea behind that. So that's how we're going to be using that. That's why you can write that this way. Part of the reason why I want to teach you ES6 syntax is because a lot of the documentation on the internet now for JavaScript, a lot of examples you're going to find, is going to be written in ES6. So whether or not you're using ES5 or ES6 isn't too important. I'm going to be teaching you mostly that newer syntax where I can. And then if you ever run into problems, I'll just note where things are different types of syntax so that you can start to get a feel of what the newer syntax is versus what the older syntax is. So that's where you're going to find your editable file in your project under student site boilerplate, source, and then scripts.js. So let's close out of VS Code for now because I actually want to work on showing you some kind of quick tutorials of how to do some basic stuff in JavaScript. One is create a variable, and two is log it out to the console. So what's the console? It's just like a place that the browser stores messages from your JavaScript. So one thing that you can do is send a log to this console. Let's take a look at what that looks like. I'm just going to blow this up a bit. The way that you do that is called console.log. And you can, let's just send a simple string, a simple text message out to the console. Hello. And now you can see in CodePen, this is showing in the console. I'm going to be doing a lot of my JavaScript demonstrations in CodePen just because it has a really easy to see console up here. The other thing that you can do, and I'm just going to clear this periodically to keep it nice and clean, is set a variable. We're going to start with the older syntax for this, just so you can see what it looks like, and then I'm going to have a separate video covering what the newer syntax looks like. But for now, let's just set a real simple variable. And you might be wondering about this point, what is a variable anyway? A variable is a place where you can store just some type of data. So you want to, like, it's kind of like a little note for yourself. Like, if I wanted to store my name, I would have variable var name, and then I would put in, as a string, Ashley. Notice a couple of things about syntax here. This equals sign is an assignment operator. That allows you to say, this name has this value. When I use my name, I put it in quotes because it is text. That's why I'm putting it in quotes. We'll talk more about variable types in a little bit, but that's what's going on with those quotes. When you have text and not a number, you're going to put that in quotes. Then finally, you're going to see at the very back here a semicolon. Just like in CSS, you need to make sure that at the end of each of your JavaScript statements, you have a semicolon. And if you don't, it's going to cause you whole tons of pain. So here you can see in the console, and I'm just going to clear this out here, that on the first line, we're logging hello. On the third line, I've set my name to Ashley. And now maybe I want to check what my name is. What is the value of name here? So another easy thing you can do with the console is just to do console.log and then a variable like name. So here, I've put in console.log name, and now you can see that it's logging out Ashley, the value of my name. So these are really, really critical pieces to have in your toolbox because they help you debug things. They really help you figure out what's going on. I use console.log all the time for debugging. There are more advanced debugging tools that you can use as you get heavier into JavaScript. But honestly, I've just used lots of console.log and gotten along just fine with that. I find it really easy. It's just quick and easy to pick up. You can put out a little message to say where in your JavaScript you are. You can check what a variable is. It's really, really great. So those are the kind of key things that you should know at this point. Just be aware of console.log, know how to add a variable, just like this. And then know that console log, you can put out a message like this, and you use quotes around that, a string, right? Or you can actually reference that variable name and see what the value is. So those are some really handy tricks that you have up your sleeve for debugging JavaScript. And now we're going to build off those by seeing what the different types of variables we have available to us are and how they work differently. So stay tuned and we'll see that next.